Welcome to Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm your host, Tom Collins, Executive Director of Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission.
And I'm Gina Roberts, Voter Education Director for Clean Elections.
Today we're talking about a year in Arizona history when two candidates claimed the office of governor.
That's right. We're going to go back to the year of 1916 when Governor Thomas Campbell and incumbent Governor George Hunt shared, and this is an air quote here, shared a single term as governor.
Governor Hunt was a character in Arizona history, and anybody who's been here, if you're listening to this and you're not here, the tomb in Papago Park is just one of the idiosyncrasies of Governor Hunt.
You know, Tom, this is 1916, right, over 100 years ago, and yet I'm still thinking about elections today. And, you know, I think, especially since 2016, and we look at 2020, we've seen, you know, disagreements over who won the election. Maybe I should do another air quote there, right? Who won the election? So I think, you know, it's always a great opportunity when we can to remind voters about how the process works, clear information about how to participate. And that's clear information from, you know, looking at the ballot design to how to fill out your ballot, to where to go vote, to how to learn whether it's 100 years ago or today. It's really important that we have a very sound voter education program, which is what we offer here at Clean Elections.
The election process has improved in 100 years in terms of exactly what you're talking about, because, you know, the care that's been taken in crafting laws and policies and putting administrators in place that really have a systemic way of making sure that every vote counts properly. We're here with Jaynie Adams, a historian with the Arizona Historical Society. Jaynie, thanks for joining Beyond the Ballot AZ.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, can you sort of set the scene for us and tell us about 1916 and these two candidates who are on a path to the governor's office?
Yeah, for sure. So 1916, of course, Arizona is a baby state. In 1916, Arizona achieved statehood after a very long journey in 1912. So that's happening. People are forging through kind of this early, what does it mean to be a state phase in Arizona? But there's also some major international happenings about the same time, right? There's the Mexican Revolution. There's the first couple years of the what is now the First World War, the war to end all wars. So it's a really complicated time, both in Arizona, in the Southwest region, and then, of course, nationally and then internationally.
So tell us a little bit about these two candidates and, you know, what the election was about.
Let's start with Hunt, because Hunt is such an interesting figure. So Hunt is also called the Old Walrus, and I think if you've seen pictures of Hunt, the reason why that is pretty obvious. Hunt, his politics are kind of in that populist, progressive vein of politics, right? Personally, he supports women's suffrage, secret ballots, income tax, kind of all of those things associated with the progressive movement. However, you know, Hunt is willing to kind of set his personal opinions aside for his constituents. So, you know, you'll see him kind of voting on things where, you know, perhaps that doesn't necessarily align with his personal politics. I think women's suffrage is one of those issues where, you know, he makes choices that toe the party line or kind of are more politically expedient and not necessarily align with his political opinions. One of my favorite, like, fun facts about Hunt is that he was an avid knitter, which is just kind of fun. Right. So you have Hunt on one side, and then you have Campbell on the other side. Campbell is Arizona's first kind of like locally born governor. And he's also the first Republican candidate for the governor's offices. And this is a time before a major political realignment that would occur in the United States. So the Republicans of 1916 Very different from the Republicans of, say, 1960, when, of course, Arizona plays a very important role in shaping Republican ideology. Campbell himself is, educated. He's a geologist. He's a mining engineer, and he's just also a very interesting guy. So you have these two guys who seem like completely opposite candidates running for an office, and at a really decisive time in Arizona's history, right? This election feels like it's going to be the thing that sets the course for the rest of the early statehood period. And I think people can feel that.
So, Jaynie, can we talk about the way people actually voted in this election in 1916? Because I know that was under a lot of scrutiny with the courts and with the recount. And I think if I understand it, they could do a little plus mark or something to that effect to vote a party ballot. But can you just talk us through what that voting process looked like and how that was scrutinized?
Yeah. So at the time in Arizona, you could vote a straight party ticket, or you could kind of mix and match. So if you envision in your mind like a table that's got 3 columns, and then all the different rows are all the different people that are running, all the different propositions, whatever's on the ballot. That first row across all 3 columns has a checkbox in it, and that allows you to just kind of vote a straight party ticket. So the issue with this election, and the reason why this election became so contentious, was because people were not just doing one or the other. They were doing both, right? So you would get ballots where somebody, voted a straight Democrat ticket, but also voted kind of on each measure or for each person. And that became really confusing, and it was hard to tell what the intention of the voter was. And one of the things that I think is most mind-bending about this particular incident is this did not trigger a redesign of the ballots. So we voted this way for another couple of cycles before people were like, this is really confusing. Maybe we should consider changing this, right? Like, we have this, frankly, kind of horrible situation where there are 2 governors at the same time, and there's all this drama, and it's in the newspaper, and nobody's thinking to themselves, maybe it's the ballots themselves that are the issue.
Design matters.
Yeah, it really does. And I think it's important to also think about what life was like at the time, right? This is kind of early days for mandatory education. So people are approaching ballots with various kind of levels of functional literacy. And if you're presenting to them something that's confusing for someone who is completely literate, that's going to be a problem if you have a swath of your voting population that is maybe not as literate. That's going to be a concern when you're designing ballots.
Absolutely. The modernization of elections since this, this is such a great illustration of how people thought about elections then and how people think about what goes into that now.
Yeah, I think the secret ballot is something that, people take so for granted. And if you know anything about the history of voting in the United States, not just in Arizona, but across the entire nation, you know that people were literally distributing food and alcohol to potential voters to try to sway them. And Election Day used to be kind of a big rager where people who didn't typically celebrate other kind of religious holidays or secular holidays, Election Day really became a major point of celebration.
So the initial results come in. Campbell's won by 30 votes, and then Hunt wants a recount. And the Superior Court says Campbell has won, and Hunt won't physically leave the office. So pick it up there.
I think that kind of legally speaking, until the recount changes, of course, the result of the election, there is technically only one governor, right? But possession is 9/10 of the law, right? So Hunt is refusing to abdicate. I can't imagine that there is a lot of gubernatorial day-to-day actually happening if you're just literally holed up in the office. So I can't imagine there's a ton happening.
It's a confusing time for voters, for the legislature, for everybody involved. So I keep making parallels to today, because when you're talking about this, I'm thinking, peaceful transitions of power, what does that look like? I think, as Tom has mentioned, our elections most certainly have been modernized, where if there's a certain margin, then it gets triggered. When did Arizona finally know who their real governor was?
That final recount doesn't really happen until 1917, right? So 1917, it's finally decided that, yes, actually Hunt is the winner. He wins by a margin of 43 votes, right? So we're still talking incredibly slim margins. And again, the best part of all of this story is Hunt leaves the governorship in 1918 to become the minister to Siam. So after all of that, he doesn't even see that term to its full end. Hunt does, of course, come back. Hunt is governor, I want to say 7 times. So he does come back to the role.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm Gina Roberts.
And I'm Tom Collins. We'll see you next week.